Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Mountaineer Locker Room Then and Now. I'm Greg Christ, your host for the show. We've got, of course, Mickey Plumley and Frank Fear in the background, waiting to come back on here in just a few minutes. We'll get our show started. We think we got another great show for you tonight, or at least we hope we do. We're going to talk football, college football. We're going to talk some Mountaineer football, of course. Also, we'll bring Daryl Prue in here in just a little bit. To talk about some basketball things that are going on. And also we have a taped interview with John Antonik on the history of WVU basketball from 1940 to 1975, which I understand is absolutely fantastic. So we hope everybody will join us for that. I want to mention to you that we'd like for you to like and subscribe here on YouTube. That's what keeps us going and what keeps us in the position to keep bringing these things to you every Wednesday night. We hope you'll like and subscribe to our show and our channel. We appreciate that very much. Just when you think things will quiet down a little bit in college football, it seems like every day there's more and more news going on and more things happening, more and more stuff to talk about, which is kind of good for us, but we're not so sure it's going to be good for college football. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight in our first segment. We have a guest by the name of Jackson Johnson. Most of you've probably seen him on some of the network shows that he co-hosts and hosts several shows of his own. And we'll talk to him about the direction of major college football, looking at the Big 12 and the SEC and their power plays and what they're planning on doing. I think we all have a little insight into what they're doing, and then maybe some ideas of what we think could possibly happen. And I think there's big changes around the corner for college football. Like, it seems like the last 2 or 3 years has just been a whirlwind of changes, and I think that's not going to change here in the next couple of years. It's still going to be pretty crazy. We talked about the NIL and scholarship money last week, which some interesting perspectives there and the impact that those things are going to have. We also had a new announcement today, and I think it was one of the Dartmouth, maybe one of the Ivy League schools, where the players voted to unionize since they considered them employees. Collective bargaining, we think, may be coming. Who knows? So a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff to talk about. And I'll quit yapping and bring in our co-host, Frank Fear. And I think also Mickey Plum is going to jump in here with us. Frank, welcome and good evening. And it's good to see you guys again.
Good to see you. How you doing, Mickey? How you doing, Greg?
Doing great, guys. It's a great day to be a Mountaineer, no matter where you may be.
That's absolutely the case.
Always is. And Frank, I mentioned in the opening there all the different things that are going on. We thought things would slow down in the football world a little bit in the off season, but it seems like it just keeps coming every day. And I just heard this morning on the radio about the Dartmouth players voting to unionize. This news just keeps coming and coming and coming. And man, I don't know. It's good for us because it gives us plenty to talk about, but who in the world knows where this mess is going to end up?
Yeah, the report I saw just before we went on was talk, and it's scuttlebutt, that the next restructuring may include tossing out some teams who are not adding to the revenue stream. So teams like Vanderbilt, for example, would be targeted. Now, who knows if that's true, because when things are so fast-paced like this, and as you say, it's happening every day, there's a lot of fodder out there. So, it'll be revealed eventually, and we're really pleased to have Jackson with us tonight because he's right in the middle of it.
Yep, and let's go ahead and bring Jackson Johnson on with us. Jackson, welcome to the show. We appreciate you joining us. Jackson does a lot of his own work and has several shows of his own. And, he mentioned earlier he had a lot to say about this Big 12 SEC movement that's going on right now. So Jackson, welcome in. And I think we just need to go ahead and get it started. What's your thoughts on the direction in college football and this power play that the Big 12 and the SEC is involved in right now?
Well, I got to say, where the Big 10 and the SEC are basically trying to run the show, well, they pretty much are running the show in all of college football. It's not good for the rest of everyone.
Right.
I mean, we saw what happened to the Pac-12, and eventually we're going to see what happens to the ACC. And this whole thing where the Big Ten and the SEC. If you look at the report from Yahoo Sports last week from Ross Dillinger, where they were basically wanting more than 3 automatic teams each in the playoff field. I mean, I'd say that's kind of like a kid throwing a fit in the grocery store because they didn't get their favorite cereal. Like, good grief.
Yeah.
And I'm going to throw this out here right now because I want to see what everybody else thinks about this. And of course, I was calling them the Big 12 since they've added a couple teams, but it is the Big 10 we're talking about. What would happen theoretically if the ACC and the Big 12? What would happen if they told the Big 10 and the SEC, hey, you know what? You guys go right ahead, do whatever you want to do. We don't want any part of it. We'll do our own thing. I just wonder what might happen if that would occur.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day, and I thought, with them demanding 3 teams in this thing, which to me is ridiculous. I don't think you should be guaranteed any teams. I think you play the season and see what happens, and then you get the best 12, 14, whatever number you want to get in there. I think this guaranteeing so many teams in is really unfair, and I know there's not a whole lot people can do about it because they are the power conferences, and I don't know what the answer is. So I was just thinking about this. You know what? I'd say, heck with you. We'll do our own. But I don't know if that's feasible, and I don't know if that would be a smart thing to do.
Well, I was going to say, if you look at the graphic that I was talking with Jackson about this before the show started, it's what's under discussion. That last sentence, it's not just the 3 slots each,
Right.
6 to 14. They want all of the Big Ten teams and the SEC teams, all 6, to have first round buys.
Right.
So that's how you get, you basically, that's how you get to 8 teams, and they get all buys. And it's not, and this is all preordained before the season starts that they would get their. So it's they're basically going to. I don't want to say throw crumbs toward the ACC or the the Big 12, but I think, Jackson, what they're going to do, and you said it, they're going to privilege themselves.
Yeah.
And before we know it, we're going to be seeing a lot of unnecessary lobbying sessions on College Game Day and on Big Noon Kickoff on Conference Title Week, like we did last season with Sankey for the SEC title game. Now, everybody's like previewing the SEC title game and all the other conference title games. But then Greg Sankey, like hours before kickoff of the SEC title game, is lobbying for more than one SEC team. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Does he know something we don't? Because that's what it felt like to me. Somebody was getting the once over, and somebody was Florida State. And if you think that, we're done seeing the once over with the 12-team playoff, I think not. Somebody from the Big 12 and somebody from the ACC is going to get the once over, and it's going to make them go, we're going to join the SEC or Big 10, or we're going to fight our way through this. Yeah. That's what we're going to be seeing.
Yeah, and I've said before, again, with these asking for these guaranteed spots, I think if you look back over the past 10 years, and I have not looked back, and I don't know this to be a fact, but it's my thinking. And you look at these conferences, there are some really good teams in the SEC, and there are some really good teams in the Big 10, but there's also some really good teams in the ACC and some really good teams in the Big 12. And if you take out, the top level teams, 2 or 3 of the top level teams, these conferences are, to me, are basically the same. There's not a huge difference in the conferences. And to guarantee these spots like they're talking about, to me, really waters things down, because you may have a 6-6 team in there. That can very easily happen, and not very good team possibly. So I don't know. This guaranteeing these teams, to me, really threw me when I heard that. I thought there's no way they can do that, but there is.
Good, yeah, Mickey. Greg, I agree with you 100% on that point. The SEC is kind of top heavy. you've got the same teams there perennially. It's Georgia, Alabama,
Yep.
occasionally LSU is in the mix. But, you take out the top three in the SEC and in the Big Ten. And, the rest of the schools, when you stack them up against the Big 12 and the ACC, I'm not sure that the records are that much better than they are in the other conferences. What I would like to see is a power play from a combination of the Big 12 and the ACC, taking, the best of those two conferences and putting them back together. You can accuse me of being old school if you want, but man, I sure miss the Big East when it comes to football. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we had the old Big East, but like Penn State was added there. That would have been awesome right there.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it would have too. And I think some of these alignments and things that they're talking about, and it almost makes you wish that you see some of this other stuff come to fruition. We talked last week, I think, about the possibility of conferences becoming like the AFC and the NFC in the NFL, and splitting those up into divisions, and then that way you could have your regional rivalries and your competition back, and then play it off just like a playoff, like they do in the NFL. And I think people like West Virginia fans would love to see that. I think, and I think that would be fair. It wouldn't guarantee anybody a spot. You would have to win your division, and you'd have to win your side of the NFL or AFC, NFC, whatever they would call it, before you could advance. And I think that would be a fair way to do it. And I think people would like that a lot better. And I think these rivalry games that mean so much to people would come back, and that would be, I think, would add so much to the game. I mean, if they're going to blow it up and do something different, I think they need to look at the NFL model and go from that, rather than having a couple players in there controlling everything. And I think that's to me, I think that's a recipe for disaster down the road, because they're going to do things to favor themselves. People will get tired of that. People, the rest of the country don't want to see that all the time. And I mean, I understand. They're coming from it from how can we make the most money? How can we keep things under control to where we're making the most money? I get all that, but I don't think that's necessarily what all the fans want.
Yeah, Sankey said that we're not trying to take control here. We're just trying to make sure that our needs are basically addressed. But clearly, with this proposal for not this year, but the 2026 CFP, it's not firm yet. It's a discussion with basically getting 6 of the teams guaranteed for those 2 leagues, plus the first round buys. But as we talked last week, and I think this reinforces Jackson's point, the Big Ten and the SEC are in the catbird seat because it's unlikely anything's going to happen out of Congress. We showed that graphic last week that showed the odds of any of those proposals in Congress becoming law is really low. And the NCAA, again, keeps on losing lawsuits. And so that just privileges the Big Ten and the SEC. What I hope, and Jackson talked about it, get your thoughts on this, Jackson, is that, going back to what Mickey said too, I grew up with the old, even before it was called the Big East, but Eastern football with Virginia Tech and West Virginia and Pitt and Penn State, Syracuse, Boston College. And those were great. That was great. And I'm not so sure within 5 years we may see the regionalization of college football again.
Agreed. I mean, that's what's got me worried. I mean, you ask somebody my age about, say, the Penn State-Pittsburgh rivalry, they're going to go, what? I mean, they're not going to know. I mean, they don't know about Dan Marino playing in that rivalry. They don't know about Franco Harris. They don't know about Jackie Sherrill coaching in that amazing rivalry. I mean, it's a shame that it's not annual. And same with like Florida, Miami. And we don't see Pittsburgh, West Virginia annually. I mean, thank goodness that it's back for another couple years and then back for 2028 and so on and so forth. But on the bright side, if we see Pittsburgh go to the ACC, we could see Pittsburgh, West Virginia come back on an annual basis for the Big 12. Because let's be honest, Texas, Oklahoma's not in the Big 12. They can't sell on Kansas State, Iowa State. They can all they want, but a lot of the national audience is not going to sit there thinking about that game. They're going to think about games like BYU, Utah, or Pittsburgh, West Virginia. Those are the games that sell, and especially if you put them on Black Friday. If you put a game like Pittsburgh, West Virginia on Black Friday, it will be ratings galore. I mean, does anybody really want to watch Arkansas, Missouri, or Iowa, Nebraska? No. They'd rather watch a game like Pittsburgh, West Virginia, or Utah, BYU. And I think if the ACC is going to survive, they have to learn from what Brett Yormark did in summer of 2021. What did Brett Yormark do? Well, not Yormark, but the other guy that was there before him. He looked at that situation, was like, we're going to lose Texas, Oklahoma, obviously. Who do we get? We get Houston. We get Central Florida, Cincinnati, BYU. That's what we do. And luckily, the Pac-12 shot themselves in the foot quite a lot, which really helped the Big 12. It was a blessing in disguise for them, because had the Pac-12 realized that, okay, we need to get Oklahoma State, Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech, and so on and so forth, they wouldn't have put themselves in that mess that they were in.
Yeah.
Jackson, do you think, and I know some of you folks follow a lot closer than I do, but do you think the Big 12 and the ACC, I mean, surely to goodness, they're talking and trying to figure out what their next move is going to be, I would think. I hope they're not just sitting back and going to be reactive. I hope they're looking at the future and trying to figure out what those two conferences are going to do and what the reaction is going to be. Do you know anything about that, or do you have any insight into that?
No, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say the Big 12 is going to survive way more than the ACC. I mean, I don't think the alliance will last. It'll last as long as the Big 10, Pac-12, ACC alliance did. Funny thing was, they left out the Big 12 in that alliance, and in a way, it's kind of karma for the ACC and the Pac.
Yeah, you just hope that the Big 12 and I mean, I think they're going to have to work together in order to have any chance of holding any ground with the Big Two. I hope they're working together on that, and I don't know if they are or what's going on, what's behind the scenes and all that, but I would Frank, surely think that there's some communication going on between these two conferences to say, hey, we got to keep these other two in check. What are we going to do? Or at least have a standing, when it comes down. So I don't know.
It would not surprise me if the Big 12 became that third super conference. I mean, they got to get some teams closer to West Virginia and Cincinnati. So who could they get? Louisville, North Carolina State, possibly. Who else? Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh.
And Memphis is really up and coming. I expect them to be in the college football playoffs this year. They're good.
Oh yeah, I mean the Louisville-Memphis rivalry that will sell quite a lot, especially in college basketball for sure.
So in the same theme, Jackson, what do you think? I mean, where do you think all this is heading? What do you think ultimately, if we're looking at it 5 years down the road, where do you think college football is going to be? What do you think is going to be going on there?
Well, it looks like we're in the Power 2 monopoly, but I think the Big 12, they're going to decide whether they want to team up with the ACC or are they going to be that third super conference. And I think that's where we're heading. We're going to see 3 super conferences, and we're going to be seeing the ACC snatch some teams from the American Conference and the Mount West. I mean, people said it was crazy to see Cal Stanford in the ACC. Don't be surprised if you possibly see a Boise State, South Florida in the ACC, and they see like San Diego State in there as well.
Well, I hadn't thought of that. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I know that. Mickey, your thoughts?
Well, Greg, again, I hate to agree with you as much as I do, but I like that model that you set up, AFC, NFC. I have my own thoughts on this, but I think 5, 6 years from now, after the wild, wild west days are over, which is what we're in right now, and some sheriff comes into town, and I think that sheriff might very well be the NFL, the National Football League. I can see them. I mean, they got deep pockets to support teams with, and just like with the Forum Club system and national and Major League Baseball with the American League and the National League, and they basically have 4 different levels at the minor show before kids can get up into the major show. And I think eventually we're going to see some model like that at work. What do you guys think? Am I just too futuristic with a thought like that, or you think it's a possibility?
Frank, you go ahead and answer that first.
Jackson, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean that can most definitely happen. We pretty much need a Marshall Dillon saving college football.
That's right. That's right. I'm thinking maybe I was going to say maybe guys we should shift a little bit closer to home here, because the other big thing that happened in the last few days, I'm not sure how many of us were expecting it, is Neil Brown got a contract extension, and Mickey brought that up. Let me throw the basics of that. Start with you, Jackson. Your thoughts about the contract extension, and let's have it, because it's one of the most interesting, if not fascinating, contract extensions with a pay cut, but with a time extension. And here it is. But Jackson, go ahead.
Well, I'll be honest. I think Neil Brown is going to have another big year in order to save himself, which, I mean, he's fine and all, but it wouldn't hurt to have another big year, like have like a 9-win season. Because, I mean, there's some people that doubt that Duke's Mayo Bowl victory over North Carolina. I mean, there's those naysayers that go, oh, well, North Carolina didn't have Drake May. What would you have done if you didn't have Drake May? And, we're looking at, say, that non-conference schedule. You got to go to Pitt, which, let me be real, that's where top 25 teams go to die, and that's where dreams go to die. But you do have Penn State coming to your backyard, which that is going to be tough, but nobody said it can't be done. So what's going to happen is, and we see that Kansas is going to be the first home game. That's going to be a scary one, but it's going to be a fun one because West Virginia is looking for revenge for that double-digit overtime loss from 2022. And I see the contract. If he leaves for another school, he's got to pay 10% of his salary. Wow. There you go.
Yeah, I think this contract has Gordon Gee's fingerprints on it, not just the AD, because the trade-off here is an extension in time, but you've got nearly a $500,000 salary reduction. Those of us who are ordinary folks, and we all are, hey, give me $4 million, I'll take it. But it's a reduction. And also the trade-off for Brown is that if he leaves, those numbers, if he's fired or if he leaves, go down. So there are real advantages for Neil. But I look at this contract and say I think it's a big win for WVU. But you guys may not think that way. Mickey, Greg, what do you think?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Well, the thing I really like about it speaks to the integrity of Neil Brown, in my estimation, that he would. I don't know if he was the one who originally brought up this idea, but I know that he has been lobbying hard to be able to reward his assistant coaching staff better than he's been able to up to this point, enable him to retain the existing talent that he has with his assistant coaches and to keep them from going somewhere else. So I think Neil, I really think he viewed this as a way for him to accomplish, a couple of things. One, to show that, he's all about financial responsibility with the university, and he's willing to put some of his own money on the line. I mean, you're talking of $135,000 a year over a 3-year period, $400,000. That, it's kind of like opening up your salary cap, if you will, if you're on a major league team, so that you can take some of that money and throw it to the assistant coaches. So from that perspective, I think it was a real move showing the sincerity of him to build not only a short-term winner at WVU, but a long-term economically justified program too. The fact he reduced the salary that he would forfeit if he left, I think from 25% to 10%, but he also got a reduction in the other amount, that the amount that the university would have to pay him if they did in fact let him go. And he agreed to all those things. And I don't think it was under duress at all. I think the fact that, they were 6 seconds away from having a 10-win season with that atrocious loss to Houston just still sticks in my craw. But, I think the man is a winner. I think he's got the best interest, not only for himself and his family, but for WVU football as well.
Yep, I think again it shows a little bit about his character and the fact that he realizes what's going on. He sees the economics of things, and 4 million, 5 million, what's the difference? But yep, I think he has spoken often about retaining his assistants and getting them better paid, which I think says a lot about him. But also I think it sends a message to the players. He's willing to sacrifice and stick it out and take less. Hopefully they'll see that and realize that they're not the only ones sacrificing, if they stay. And I think that was a good move on his part. But again, I think he is genuinely concerned about keeping his assistant coaches and building the program. And I think money, although it's important, it's important to everybody, but I think it's important to him. But I don't think money is what drives him. And I think he's been given, the opportunity to extend his contract and coach football here at West Virginia. And I think that's what he wants to do. And if it means sacrificing a little bit of money, he's obviously willing to do that. And I think that shows a great deal about him and his commitment to the program. So I was pretty happy about it when I read it. And, I've said all along, when you have a coach that is a good person, good morals, he's fair, he treats his players fairly. He's a good man. You can tell that, a family man. There's not going to be any reports of West Virginia being put on probation for violations because he's not that type of character. And I think that says a lot, and that means a lot to a program. And that we've, for the most part, always been in that situation where our program's clean. And I think he runs a clean program, and he obviously knows football. What else do we want, and what better could we get? And I don't. A lot of people know X's and O's, but I think there's a lot more to it than that. And I think he has demonstrated that a lot of those qualities. And I think it's a good move on WVU's part as well to give him that extension and retaining icing on the cake that he wants less money. So shovel that to the assistants. I think that's great. Frank, I don't know how you feel about it, but that's
I agree with you.
I'm a Neil Brown fan, I always have been, so that's my thoughts on him.
Same, and I think I would add the recruits. It's important there's stability there. But Jackson nailed it. I saw there actually on the network there was a poll. Basically, it had asked people. Some of you may have participated. I did. That Joey put up. That was, do you trust the climb? And do you want to see more? And the number one response was they want to see more. So he's got to continue winning. But we saw, I think, a different Neil Brown last year when he was calling his plays. They're far more aggressive. We have a great offense. And so lots to look forward to. There's no question. I'm thinking, Greg, we should maybe make the pivot to basketball right now.
Yep.
And Jeff, you're welcome to stay with us on the basketball deal. It's totally up to you.
I'd be happy to.
Okay. You're going to really, John Antonik's presentation, a real treat. And I see we have Daryl in the back room. So Mickey, you're going to be taking off, or you're going to be sticking with us? You're going to be taking off.
Yeah,
right?
I'll be. I have another commitment I have to make, Frank. But thanks so much for having me on
Yeah.
again this evening, and look forward to start talking about spring practice here pretty soon. Not that
Yeah.
far away. Less than a month, we'll be starting.
Oh, man.
All right. All right,
Exciting.
Mickey.
All right, guys.
Take care, Mickey.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
We'll bring in Daryl.
Yep, bring in our basketball guru, Daryl Prue. Daryl, what's up?
Hey, fellas, how y'all doing?
Doing
great.
pretty good. How are you doing tonight, man?
I'm good. I'm good.
Daryl, we wanted to, before we actually talk about the team, which I know me and you have talked about it week after week, and we seem to be kind of stuck in a rut talking about the same thing over and over and over again. So we're going to change course here just a little bit. I know you're very close to your former coach, Gail Catlett, and Coach lost his wife last week. And I know you're close to the family and wanted to talk a little bit about his wife and what she meant to him and the WVU players and the program. So I'm gonna just let you go with it and talk a little bit about your connection there.
It goes way back to 1985 when I landed on campus, and she's been that motherly figure away from home. Just she was the same person, and then until her passing, probably even sweeter as she got older. She was always nice, always the same. I would come back, try to come back each year and see them. It's just, and the relationship she built with my grandparents was amazing. Up until their death, she would send them birthday cards and Christmas cards every year. And not just a card saying happy birthday, Merry Christmas. She'll write, extensively in the card, telling them where she is, where they are. When it gets cold, they're usually in Florida or Hawaii, so they're always somewhere. Then their oldest daughter married someone in the service, and they were in South Africa, so they took trips to South Africa. So they kept me and my grandparents, informed of every move they made. That's 30 years, and they were still doing it. You know what I mean? That means a lot. They think sometimes it's not for every player don't get the same kind of attention. Sometimes the attention you give the family and they'll give it back. Sometimes guys think they should be in the NBA, so they get mad at the coach instead of just being realistic and being a person. So I just it was wonderful to treat me as a person. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and it was just wonderful. I mean, it was just like even with it was the Catlets, the Fords. You know what I mean? They it was like a family away from a home, and but she was very special, and everybody would say it. All the players would say it. All the players. If you find one player that says she wasn't sweet, I might have to fight them. But it's it's so many accolades I can say, and I don't know if I can know all of them, but she didn't have a mean spirit in her body. Even when coach was pushed out, she gave me a little side eye, but I remember one time I came up. This is after I was coaching in Georgetown, and me and him talked in the summertime, and he started talking about basketball. And she took me outside and said, "Thank you." I was like, "What?" I was like, "He didn't talk about basketball, so I said, let him go." And you just lit a fire up under him. You know what I mean? And that's this is one of the sweetest things I remember. My grandfather was sick, and he got diagnosed with cancer. Coach was in town. Coach was like, "Yo, let's meet up." I was like, my grandfather's sick. He would love to see you. He said, "What's the address?" And he beat me to the house. I get here, they're already here. My grandfather had his head on the chest. Miss Catlett was outside talking to me, just saying all the wonderful things that a person can say. And those kind of you can't put a price on those kind of relationships. And even when she was going through what she was going through, I've talked to Catlett more, and the more I talk to him, it's about basketball. And we went to the Kansas game, and we were talking about basketball. And when I talked to him this week, he was talking about, "Yeah, I'm gonna come down and stay at your house." I was like, "All right, cool. You can come stay." Yeah, let's go to some basketball games. I'm like, okay. So, the little distraction what he probably needs. But he has a grandson down this way that I'm trying to help out with the AAU scene down here and the high school scene. It's his first year living in the States, so he just came over here in the summertime. So he's been, trying to figure out to navigate through all that. So I'm trying to help him out down here. So I'm sure Coach is going to be down here, trying to help out also. So
Right.
yeah, it's
I,
just
I got a question to ask you about. It's been on my mind since I saw it, but I went to a game a few weeks ago. I remember UCF, I think, so we were playing, and we're just sitting there looking around, and we had decent seats. We were at the half court, but we were in the press row, up at the top of the press row. And I was looking around, and I looked over in the corner, and Coach Catlett was sitting over there. Well, he's up in the corner, almost behind the basket. And I told my brother who was there with me, I said, you would think that if he wanted to come back to a game, he'd just call him up and they would put him down by the floor somewhere. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on here. What's the deal with that? It's bothered me since I saw it. I'm thinking he should be sitting down there close to the court somewhere if he wants to. Maybe he chooses to sit up there. I don't know. So that's why I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I think that's him. I don't think he likes a lot of attention, like that anymore.
Right.
But he told me they give him 2, 3, 4 tickets a year. So that's what they put him at. Yeah, I mean, like yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah. I had some issues too because I remember when we came back for the alumni games. You see the pictures on the Coliseum up on top. That's where they used to sit us. I was like, come on, man. You know what I mean? Like,
Wow.
So now they have me sitting. They'll have us sitting. Like Larry Harrison had me sitting behind the bench up a little bit, which was cool. But now they had me behind the students on the same side, on that side, and it's like this is no respect for all the people that came, here before and played. You know what I mean? And I only ask 1 or 2 tickets. It's not like I'm asking for 10. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm only coming back once or twice a year, so. Yeah, it's a little.
My feeling, and I think most people's feeling would be that if Coach Catlett wants to come to game, you want to come to a game, you make a phone call. You don't need a ticket. You just come in and they have a place for you to sit.
Well, it's been a long time. It's been a long time since I've been playing there, so there's a lot of people who probably wasn't born yet. So we have to go through all that first. I do get the parking. I do tell them I'm an alumni, and they let me park in the back. But like the time me and Coach was at the game, they did put our pictures on the jumbotron, which was nice. I was there the last time with my big fella, Lowe's Moore was there, and they put his picture. And somebody texted me, "Aren't you here?" That's like, well, I wasn't sitting in the seats they gave me. I sat near the big guy. So it's not, you would want. I don't, coaches are funny, and coaches don't get along with this coach and they coached there before and this and that. That's all irrelevant. Like all the players I get along with that play now and before me, I get along with. It's Mountaineer. We are all Mountaineers. You know what I mean? Like we all played there. I don't care about being better than the other guy and stuff like that. We're all family. And sometimes when we come back, we see what the football do. You see how they have that camaraderie and have those alumni games, and like I had to make an email John Antonik and Antonik, whatever, I can't even pronounce his name, and we put the pictures on the wall. We haven't had a ceremony. Coach didn't see. He didn't know about the picture. I told him about it, but the first time he saw it, I had to walk him around the Coliseum so he could see it. So because like when you say you saw him sitting at the jumbotron was in his way, so he couldn't see it. So we ended up walking around, and his grandkids and his daughter took a picture of it. He didn't want to walk all the way up them steps, which I understand. But he got a chance to see it, and a lot of the people walked up to him and said hello. So I think it was a good thing for him, a good feeling.
Yeah, Frank, I think me and you're going to have to go over and have a little talk with the PR people over and get this message out.
It's interesting because what we're talking about now is not an issue of WVU only. It is an issue, and you saw the folks who were watching tonight, Daryl, just appreciating what you said, because that's the image we have of what college athletics is supposed to be. It's a relationship forever, but it often doesn't happen. And and we have the thing is, and I'll just put this this slide up now, is that we have a lot to be thankful for with West Virginia basketball. You know, I think most people know that West Virginia football is in the top 20 in terms of all-time wins, but so is WVU basketball. 62% wins, almost 2,000 wins, ranked 20th nationally, 6th in the Big 12. And, you know, I was thinking about this when I was growing up. You know, the sort of the center of the basketball world was West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio with Ohio State. Cincinnati was phenomenal with Oscar Robertson. Ohio State with Havlicek. Obviously, with West Virginia and people like Hot Rod Huntley and Jerry West, et cetera, unbelievable. And so we should have a lot of pride in this, and I know we do. But yeah, there's a lot to celebrate with WVU basketball. This year's tough, but at any rate.
Well, I think, you know, the image that you project as a program goes a long way to you know, recruits see it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an image that you're projecting, and you know, you honor your past and your past players, your past coaches.
Right.
You let people see that, and then that, I mean, that people are endeared to the program when they see things like that, and I think it's something important that they need to work on. So so Frank, I don't know about you, but I'm going to pull strings and get to the bottom of this. All the people that will help. I'll give it a shot. Hey, listen, Frank interviewed John Antonik the other day about the history of WVU basketball from 1940 to 1975, and we had to record that because of our limitations with StreamYard. So I think, Frank, we need to, just for time purposes, if nothing else, we need to go ahead and get that on, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about it at the end.
You know, how can I put this? And I don't want to slight anybody, but, you know, we all have an opportunity to have contact, read, watch on television, and so on. People in the sports world. Here in Morgantown with John Antonik, we have one of the best of the best. I was telling the guys before the show that, you know, I take a college class from him, and you're gonna be, I think, be blown away by the insights and the knowledge and the stories he tells. And what we thought we would do is start by putting up this visual, because a lot of people, in fact, I should take out this the West Virginia banner so you can see that completely. These are some of the people in red that he's going to talk about, and those are going to be new names for a lot of people. How many people know who Dyke Racy is? But you can see he was way in 39, but WVU won a national championship when the NIT really was far beyond the NCAA. And then Red Brown was really known to most of us, to me, as an athletic director, but he was a hell of a basketball coach, won 70% of his games. And then he hired Fred Schaus. And then Fred Schaus, I mean, that's another name that some people, younger folks, may not know, but this guy was a phenom. He not only was head coach at WVU and had a 80% win rate. The team finished second in the NCAAs, almost won the national championship. Cal won by 1 point in 1959. And then Schaus goes on, not only to become athletic director at WVU, but head coach of the Lakers and head coach at Purdue. And another name that people may not know, they'll talk about him, is a guy by the name of George King. Again, look at those winning percentages, 70%. George King was a great coach from Charleston, great coach at West Virginia. And then he went and became coach and AD at Purdue, and then hired Freddie Schaus when he was AD to be head coach at Purdue. And then getting closer to home, this stops just short of the Gail Catlett era. Bucky Waters, who then went on to become head coach at Duke, and then Sonny Moran is the end of this period, and that's the only coach from 1939 on who had a losing record. So when you think about it, it's just amazing. And we didn't know what period that he was going to talk about, and that's what John decided to talk about. And so what I'm going to do now is put this cover up with some pictures of people that he's going to be talking about. There's Hot Rod Hundley. You got Jerry West and Fred Schaus up in the upper left-hand corner. And some other, Dyke Racy is at the bottom, and other folks you may not know all that well, but he's going to get into. So let me keep that up, and let's start the tape and see what we can do here. And I think it's going to take me a second to bring it up. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And here we go. You with us, and we appreciate your taking the time. I know you're very busy getting ready for the Big 12 tournaments coming up, both women's and men, but I'll turn it over to you to talk about WVU basketball history.
Well, it's extensive. Obviously, West Virginia basketball, everybody remembers the golden era with Jerry West and Rod Hundley and Rod Thorne. There was a time when West Virginia had a series of All-American players, starting from Mark Workman in the early 1950s and went all the way along up to Fritz Williams in the mid 60s. So it's been a great run. I know when through the years there was a time, believe it or not, when people considered Mountaineer basketball on par with Kentucky in terms of prestige and relevance. And when you think about West Virginia basketball, I particularly during the years of Hundley and West and Thorne, I compare it a lot to Gonzaga because they were in a conference similar, dominated a conference the same way that Gonzaga dominated their conference, and then branched out on a national level with what West Virginia did. Because I think the Southern Conference was kind of in the shadows of the ACC, which had broken off from the Southern Conference in the early 50s. And West Virginia managed to overcome some of the competitive things that they had in the Southern Conference with the schedule that they played. I mean, they played a national schedule. They traveled everywhere. And West Virginia basketball in the 50s was phenomenal, and into the 60s. So great history. Even before that, into the 40s. And I think one of the links to those two eras was probably Fred Schaus. Fred Schaus played for Lee Patton, learned a game from Lee Patton, and in the 50s had great teams, and then used that to get a job with the Lakers when Jerry West went there. So great history for many years, and I know a lot of old timers. It's just viewed with great fondness and enjoy. Jerry West, I think, was the key. And, Jerry West not only helped basketball recruiting, he helped football recruiting. A lot of the football recruits that came to West Virginia knew about Jerry West. I think he was an important piece. Obviously, he was a state native. His name was on the front of the jersey and on the back of the jerseys. How many players do you know that can have that happen? And for him to be able to represent WVU. But the thing about Mountaineer basketball, and some of the guys that I talked to through the years, what made Mountaineer basketball so appealing and exciting was the style of play. And it emanated in the high school system. You had guys like Jerome Van Meter and Antonik and all these great coaches in West Virginia that was playing an up-tempo style of basketball. And I can remember Chuck Noe, who coached at Virginia Tech. They always used to say that had Chuck Noe not recruited Chris Smith, that West Virginia would have won the national championship in 1959, because Chris Smith was from Charleston. He was about 6'7". He was a tough inside player, and that's what the team lacked that year. They had everything else. And I mentioned that to Fred Schaus one time, and Fred Schaus said, yeah, that's true. But had Chuck Noe gotten Jerry West, they would have won a national championship at Virginia Tech. So, but the thing is that Chuck Noe came to West Virginia and recruited a lot of players. There were a lot of good basketball players in West Virginia that did not go to West Virginia University. There just wasn't enough room on the roster for all these players. Howard Hurt was an all-ACC player at Duke. Johnny Fry from Huntington was an all-ACC player at Duke. There were players at Richmond. There were players at other schools that couldn't get on the roster at West Virginia. And I remember Eddie Barrett, who was the publicist here for all those years, he said that Chuck Noll would come in West Virginia and he would look at the box scores, and he would see the scores in the 80s and the 90s, and he would look at the box scores of the games in Virginia, and they were in the 40s and 50s. He said, I want those guys. Those are the guys I want on my team. And that's the style that West Virginia played. Fred Schaus was a showman. He liked the things that Rod Hundley did. He wanted, one of the things that Fred Schaus wanted to do, he actually made his guys shave their arm hair, shaved their armpits and their legs. He thought that would make them appealing to women because he wanted to grow the program and get fans to the games. And I remember Hundley telling me that was one of the things that Fred Schaus did, was he made them shave their arms and so forth, because he thought that would make them look more appealing to women. They used the high knee socks that North Carolina had popularized. And they had a special basketball that they warmed up with. They had a carpet. There was a guy in, it was Wonder Weave carpet. And I can't remember I think it was in North Carolina. He came to Fred and said, hey, would you like to do this? And Fred said, yeah, that would be great. And they put this carpet, they introduced the carpet. So the team would run out on a carpet. They had this special ball, and it was an event. I mean, listen, first of all, you couldn't get to Morgantown in the 50s. It was very difficult. It took all day to get there, and kids were car sick when they would pull up to the arena, but it was like the pros. It was like the big time when they got to go into the field house and see Hundley and see West and see Thorne. That was a big deal. And I think Fred Schaus was a person that really understood and fostered that, I think, and a lot of that came into play in the 50s. And West Virginia had a great reputation. And I think one other thing, I just wrote about it today. Another important piece to the marketability and the brand of Mountaineer basketball was WWVA. When WWVA came on board in the early 50s, it was a 50,000 watt station, okay? Very similar to KMOX and the way KMOX broadcast the St. Louis Cardinals, and you had legions of Cardinal fans all over the country because they could get KMOX at night. It was the same thing with Mountaineer basketball. Not so much football because the signal, in the daytime didn't reach as far as it did at night, but at night, when WWVA broadcast Mountaineer basketball games, you could hear it everywhere. And they were good. They had good, exciting teams. And when you go from Hundley to West to Thorne, there were a lot of fans in New York and along the Eastern Seaboard, DC, whatnot, that listened to Mountaineer games. Well, in 1963, WWVA dropped the network. For whatever reason, I'm not sure why, and that left a big hole in the coverage for Mountaineer basketball. Well, there was a fan in Richmond, Virginia, named Lowell Schwab, who was from Kingwood. He was a doctor in Richmond. He couldn't get the games, so he took time off, came up to West Virginia, and asked him what he could do to try to get the games so he could list them. Obviously, there was no satellite radio back then. There was no streaming apps. If you didn't get the games on terrestrial radio, you didn't get the games, and they weren't on television. And I can remember Mike Patrick telling me a story about television. When television came aboard, the officiating immediately improved because everybody saw how bad it was in road games. Before, you'd go, during the days of the radio, you could go to a game and West Virginia might be playing George Washington at Uline Arena, and Jerry West might have 3 fouls in the first 5 minutes because nobody saw the games unless you were there. But at any rate, so Lowell Schwab goes and he realizes that there's nothing can be done about WWVA. They're not going to carry the games. So he goes to Richmond and he goes to WRVA in Richmond, another 50,000 watt station, goes to them and convinces the station manager, if he can find a sponsor, WRVA will put the games on. They had tried to put on William and Mary and Virginia Tech games, couldn't do it, couldn't find a sponsorship. So Lowell Schwab went out on his own and found Old Dominion Candy Company in Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia, to sponsor West Virginia basketball games on WRVA, 275 miles away from Morgantown. They carried the games. He went out and raised money. He had what was called a West Virginia Basketball Radio Fund. They raised $2,500, all in $1, $5, and $10 donations to come up with the money to pay for the phone lines. They had the games on. That's how popular Mountaineer basketball was in the early 1960s. One fan took it upon himself to get the games on a radio station that was not even remotely near a market in West Virginia.
That's a great story.
It opens the whole world. I mean, I can remember Rod Hundley telling me when he was a kid, he bounced around from home to home because he was basically an orphan. And he would tell me that in one of the homes that he lived in Charleston, he lived underneath the steps, and they put up a little curtain and had a bed, and he had a transistor radio, and he would listen to the basketball games. He listened to Jack Fleming, and he'd get a little piece of paper and he would line it out and keep score of the games and keep the stats of Leland Bird and Hard Times Green and all of those guys from those teams in the 1940s. And that's how he developed a love for basketball. And that's Jerry West was another one. When he was a kid, he used to listen to the Mountaineer games in bed with a radio down so his parents couldn't hear him. And he would listen to the games at night. And that's how these guys grew up. And, I think the key moment in the history of West Virginia basketball, without question, was 1942. Prior to 1942, they didn't give scholarships. Your players were made up of football and baseball players that did get scholarships, particularly football. 1942, Dyke Gracie takes the team. Well, let me back up. It was 2 years prior when they eliminated the center jump, after each basket. That completely changed basketball. Guys like George Mikan and a lot of the teams in the Big Ten dominated basketball with big players. It was a slow game. It was a boring game. Every time there was a basket, there was a stoppage of play to do a jump ball. When that changed, basketball changed. And Dyke Gracie was ahead of the curve. Dyke Gracie was a coach who wanted movement. He wanted passing. He wanted motion. He wanted fast players. He wanted guys who could handle the ball and shoot it. And he developed those types of teams at West Virginia. And in 1942, they had a team that was good enough to qualify for the NIT. Back then, only conference champions went to the NCAA tournament. Really, in my opinion, I think West Virginia could legitimately claim a national championship in 1942 because the NIT was every bit as good as the NCAA tournament. Kentucky went to that tournament every year. The NCAA tournament really didn't become what it was until after the gambling scandal that took place in the late 40s, early 50s with CCNY and Kentucky and all of that, and then the NCAA kind of took it over and became the prominent tournament. But back in the 40s, the NIT was every bit as good as the NCAA tournament. Well, West Virginia obviously goes through that tournament, upsets Claire B., who was from Grafton, West Virginia, coached at LIU. They beat Western Kentucky, and then he beat, I think it was Toledo. I don't remember exactly the order of the games, but won the championship game. And from that moment on, there was a small network of radio stations that covered the games. Everybody heard the games in West Virginia. The following year, West Virginia gets its first basketball scholarship. Jimmy Walthall's cousin, Joe Walthall, who was from Greenbrier Military Academy. They began giving scholarships. They expanded their roster, and kids in West Virginia really began to start playing basketball. And that's really, in my opinion, when the development and growth of basketball in the state really happened. And I know Jerry West told me this once, that when they used to play an all-star game, they used to play the West Virginia, Kentucky all-star games. In the years that he played, they beat Kentucky. West Virginia may not have had as many players that they had as Indiana or Kentucky or different states, but every bit as good. The players that were developed here during that period, every bit as good as those states, just not as many.
That NIT was very important. And my understanding is it was really through a political connection that West Virginia, is it correct? I think it was only an 8-team field.
They were the 8th seed, yeah.
Yeah, and they were the last team selected, I think.
What happened is they beat they won on the road. It was Army. They won an Army 57-40. And then at the end of the year, Legs Hawley did a little bit of horse trading. Which they used to say that Legs Hawley had a briefcase and he would go around and the only thing in his briefcase was a bottle of whiskey. And that was that was how he did his negotiating, with the bottle of whiskey. But they got into the tournament. They were the 8th seed. Now, I'll tell you something else that's kind of a part of this. West Virginia became a favorite team in New York City. And I think one of the reasons why was because of the gamblers. Because if you remember, West Virginia was the 8th seed, and people that put money on the Mountaineers won a lot of money in that tournament. And for years when they were invited, they were always a fan favorite when they went to New York, because Mountaineers, because as you know, the NIT, there was a lot of gambling that went on in that tournament back in the 40s. That was one of the hidden parts of that tournament. And West Virginia made them a lot of money. And you mentioned about Fred Schaus, and you mentioned about Legs Hawley. Red Brown also too. After Legs, when Legs died of a heart attack, Red Brown took a chance on Fred Schaus.
That's right.
To be the coach. And Fred had never coached before. And one of the reasons why he did it was because he wanted a young coach that had a professional background and a pedigree with a tie to West Virginia. Number one, that he could get for a cheap amount of money, which he did, but also to somebody who could be a mentor to Hundley, because Hundley was a handful. And, when Fred got the job, not within weeks after he got the job, Hundley left campus and went to Philadelphia to be on that touring team that was similar to the Globetrotters, the Spas. And he was going to turn pro and go and tour, and tore out his knee and came back to campus. So that's what Fred had to deal with right away with Hundley. And Fred wasn't much older than Hot Rod. There was a close similarity there to age. And he was able to steer through that and keep Rod on course and get him through his career here to get to Jerry West and get to those teams that were much better than when Hundley was here. But with Red, one of the interesting things, and Bucky Waters pointed this out to me, when Bucky Waters was an assistant coach at Duke, he had offers to go and coach at LSU, West Virginia, and there were a couple of other places that were considering him. And the reason he picked West Virginia over LSU was because West Virginia was one of the few schools in the country at the time that had an athletic director with a basketball background. And they didn't have that at LSU. He knew he was going to be the redheaded stepchild to LSU football there. And if you remember, LSU ended up hiring Press Maravich, and he brought his son, Pete. Bucky tried to recruit Pete Maravich here. And Pete didn't have high test scores, so he couldn't get in to the schools in the North Carolina schools. He could get into West Virginia, but of course, there was no way that Press was not going to, go wherever he was going to go and not take his son with him because Pete Maravich was obviously part of that deal. But that's what West Virginia basketball was. And Bobby Bowden told me this. He said, when we got there in football, we knew that West Virginia was considered like North Carolina and Kentucky with basketball. And Jim Carlin went out and changed that. And that was kind of at the time when the change came from West Virginia being a basketball school to more of a football school, particularly in terms of interest and funding and all of that. And that's when it changed.
From my perspective, that going to today, that's one of the reasons I think Steve Kerr is such a terrific pro coach because he has such a rich background. As a lot of people don't know, he was a GM too for a while with Phoenix, as well as obviously being a pro player with Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And talk about difficult personalities. A lot of people would say coaching in the NBA is as much about managing the player as it is about X's and O's. In fact, there may not even be a comparison. Yeah.
It's getting like that in college basketball too.
That's right.
I think so, particularly now with NIL and what's going on. You would talk to coaches for years, and they always said that you had to be kind of dictatorial in nature, manage your program with an iron fist, and kind of manage all aspects. I'm not sure you can do that anymore.
No.
I know Catlett coached that style, Bob Huggins to a degree, Fred Schaus, all these successful coaches managed every aspect of the program and demanded a lot from their players, and their players obviously produced. But that's kind of changing now. And I think, to your point, I think innovators, coaches that can manage players, coaches that can keep their rosters intact, coaches that maybe do things a little bit different than everybody else. I think those are the ones that are the most successful. And if you look at college basketball today, there are no dominant teams because the rosters turn over so much. The players jump around, and that starts in high school and AAU. I mean, these guys are going from AAU team to AAU team to high school. That's just a part of the nature of the sport now. So it's almost impossible to be able to take a team, get a group of freshmen, and then run them through your program for 4 years and keep those guys intact. That's just not part of the game now. So the coaches that can figure things out, that can develop them as quickly as possible, get them to play a style that they can play together, and I think those are the ones that are the most successful. And that's what's the approach that probably West Virginia is going to have to take moving forward, is finding guys, finding that some way to develop their niche to be able to do what they can do.
Yeah, and related to that again is the important role of the athletic director to be able to understand and embrace what you just said, John, and then go pick.
Well, I'll tell you, and you make a great point, because Ren Baker has a extensive background in basketball. He knows this game. He grew up working for Eddie Sutton. He coached basketball. He understands the game, and he has a keen awareness. He was on the NIT selection committee, so he studies the game. He understands analytics. He knows all the different aspects to the game. So West Virginia is in great hands in that regard, having an AD who understands the game. And
I'm just going to say that that's great because, again, for the fans, one of the reasons we do this with guests like you is to help fans understand some of the the nooks and crannies, so to speak, of understanding success. And one of the things we both know is that it's if you follow the recipes, so to speak, formula you outlined, you can win in basketball, and it doesn't take 10 years. I mean, you look at these teams that come out, you may not be able to sustain it, but you'll be able to win and make national noise. And that's one of the things that are very exciting. I mean, I think years back, you talked about West Virginia being one player away. Well, St. Bonaventure, they were one player away when Bob Lanier went down. St. Bonaventure would have won the national championship 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely correct.
Well, it doesn't take many. It doesn't take many players in basketball to get things right. So that's the good news. You just have to find the right guys. And for years, West Virginia had relied on local players, state players. Their best teams up until the modern era came from West Virginia guys. I can remember a funny story. Levi Phillips. I don't know if you're familiar with that name. He played at Charleston. And this was this was around the time when West Virginia was beginning to transition from having a lot of in-state players that were good enough to play at West Virginia to the point where there were much fewer. The pickings was much more slim. I know Bucky Waters told me, he said he would get calls from people that would say, hey, get down here. You need to go down to War. The next Jerry West is down at War, or he's over at Burnsville or whatever. And Bucky would go to these places. He'd say, there are no more Jerry West. The wells run dry. They just aren't there. Well, Levi was a good player at Charleston. And George King, who was Fred Schauf's assistant at WVU, went to Purdue, recruited Rick Mount, went to the national championship game, and actually hired Fred when he was the AD at Purdue. George King is coaching at Purdue. He's recruiting Levi Phillips in Charleston. George King was from Charleston, one of the great players in the state. Probably after Jerry West, you could argue his career in pro basketball, he won an NBA championship with Syracuse, you could argue was equally as good as Huntley's. Maybe some people think he might have been the second best player to play basketball in West Virginia in the pros. George King had a great career at Purdue, so he's coaching at Purdue. He's recruiting Levi Phillips. West Virginia staff at the time, Sonny Moran, Gary McPherson, are concerned. They go down. They have a home visit with Levi's mom. They're sitting in the either in the kitchen or the living room with Mrs. Phillips. Levi gets up, excuses himself. I think he's whatever. He leaves the room, and Levi's mom looks at the coaches, McPherson and Moran. She's got this worried look on her face. She says, "Coach, I love George King. He's such a wonderful man." He said, I know he'll take care of my son, but I just can't see myself letting my son leave the country to play at Peru. And Sonny looks at her and says, Peru? And Gary stops him, puts his hand on his knee, and looks over at Levi's mom and says, Mrs. Phillips, you know, Peru is an awful long way from Charleston. So West Virginia ends up getting Levi Phillips because Levi's mom thinks he's going to leave the country to play at Peru. But you know, that was at a time when every good prospect in the state was valued. I mean, they had Warren Baker was from Greenbrier. He was a great player from the state. Maurice Robinson was a big name player, and a lot of these guys, the link to getting them to come to West Virginia was Fritz Williams. You know, Fritz Williams was the first black player. He was from Weirton, probably the most recruited player in the history of the state. When Fritz Williams came to West Virginia, it was a big, big deal. And obviously Fritz had a good career here. People thought it could have been better, you know, had George King coached him instead of Bucky Waters, but he had a good NBA career. And a lot of the black players after Fritz Williams, including Will Robinson, on up through, Fritz was the key to recruiting them. And, you know, I mentioned Will Robinson. I'll tell you a funny story about Will Robinson real quick here. I know we can go on and on and on, and we don't have unlimited time here, but Will Robinson was a great player, a terrific player, and you know, challenged and actually broke Jerry West's season scoring record. The one year that when they had the car wreck, I mean, he was the only player they had left. And that great tragedy when they lost most of their roster, he was scoring all the points. Well, one year, Will was, and they always used to say about Will that he couldn't go to his left. And as Gary McPherson told me, he said, we didn't need to. Nobody could stop him going to his right. So they're playing a game. They're playing a game down in playing George Washington, which was a big rival. And if you ever get Bob Huggins on your show, bring up the name Pat Talent, because Pat Talent used to wear him out. Huggins could not guard Pat Talent from GW. West Virginia and GW had a pretty good rivalry during the years they were in the Southern Conference, and then in the years when they were independents. So they're playing a game over in Virginia. George Washington didn't have, they used to play in Uline Arena, but they were playing across the river in Virginia, and they're playing a game, and it's a close back and forth game. And if you remember back then, they didn't have a 3-point shot. They didn't have a shot clock. So you could do 4 corners, you could hold the ball or whatnot and slow the game down or whatnot. So they're in a close game, and there's about a minute left, and Sonny Moran calls timeout. He brings the team over, and he goes through and he says, this is what I want you guys to do. He draws up the strategy. He says, I want the ball in Will Robinson's hand, and I want Will to shoot the ball with not a lot of time left on the clock, because George Washington had a timeout. They could call timeout, whatnot, and if they got the ball and got the rebound and go down and score and get the winning points. So Will's like, okay, coach, got it. So they go back out on the floor, and obviously the ball gets around to Will, and Will's dribbling out the clock with his back to the scoreboard, trying to dribble it down before he's going to make a move and shoot a shot. And so all of a sudden, the students in the crowd start counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2. So Will turns around and shoots this wild shot, misses, it gets off the backboard. George Washington grabs the rebound, calls timeout. There's still 10 seconds left on the clock. So they come over the side, and Sonny goes, Will, what are you doing? I told you, don't shoot the ball until there's no time left on the clock. He said, well, the students were counting down, and they were counting down, and I heard them. He said, I thought they were telling the truth. And his teammate, Dick Simons, who's from Toronto, Ohio, looks at him and says, Will, what the hell are you doing? This is Washington, D.C. Nobody tells the truth here. So West Virginia ended up winning the game in overtime, and that was kind of neat.
Yeah. John, this has been great. I knew it would be. I learned so much, and I think this will be great for the fans who will watch it too. There's so much to be proud of. I keep on telling people this, even though I don't need to tell them. There's so much to be proud in terms of WVU athletics. And it's not just a source of pride, it's really informative educationally. And I think we all hold the same, I know we do, hold the same hope that it's going to come around again, where WVU is a major force in what happens nationally.
It will,
and I agree.
It will, because we've got great fans, we've got people that care. As long as you have people that care, you've got good people. It will come back, and I'm confident that it will. I know that it's a challenging climate right now. I know things are changing daily, but as long as the people care, West Virginia basketball, West Virginia football, West Virginia sports will always be strong.
We'll just stop it there. He could have gone on, who knows how much longer, but that wasn't that a hell of a presentation, guys?
Absolutely, was unbelievable. And Frank, people my age, remember a lot of the history he's talking about. People a little older than me, see those great teams and all that. But I don't think a lot of this younger generation, I need to hear this, because they don't realize how lofty a program WU was and remained for years. And I don't think people get that now. I don't think they see that, because they obviously don't remember any of this. But listening to John talk about it's just fascinating. One of the things that fascinates me is when he starts throwing out some of these names of players that West Virginia didn't get in certain eras and that sort of thing. He mentioned one guy, Howard Hurt. Howard Hurt played at Duke, and I had Howard Hurt on my show one night. He was a superintendent in Fayette County for a while in the school system. I got to know him there. But to hear him rattle off these names, these past figures, it is amazing, the knowledge that he has, and it's so much fun to listen to him. I can listen to him for hours.
Yeah. Carol?
Yeah, I mean, Ray Schaus was my AD when I was at West Virginia. So you hear some of the stuff, you hear some of the stories and stuff like that. I didn't meet Rod Thorne until Coach's retirement. But some of the guys would come by, Willie Akers and all those guys would come through every now and then. And I know Cantley played on one of those teams.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Jackson, what's your thoughts?
Well, one of my favorite parts of the interview was when one of the players' mothers was worried about her son having to go to Peru, and the coach goes, "Peru? That's a long way from here to Charleston." But that was the one that got me laughing.
The real funny part is that's the same guy that recruited me, Gary McPherson.
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah,
but what's interesting about that is that the interesting thing about that, John said, is that Sonny Moran was prepared to tell him, no, not Peru, Purdue. And it was McPherson that intervened. And what he did, boy, he was sharp. He didn't say anything that was a fabrication or a misdirection. He just said, "You're right, ma'am. It's a long way to Peru." And they got him. And what a great player he was. And I was blessed to see Will Robinson, who after West Virginia had a great career in business. He's living in the Buffalo area now. What a prolific scorer! I mean, when I think of Will, I think of Daryl in terms of that shot. It was silk, smooth as silk.
Yep. Yeah, when you look back and list some of these names and you look at those players he talked about, there were some phenomenal basketball players and a lot of them pro careers and that sort of thing. A lot of good basketball players. And he mentioned the NIT. You know, the NIT back then was bigger than the NCAA tournament. That was the tournament that you wanted to go to. And for them to have won that, that's a pretty good story as well. So the history is unbelievable. And I like I said, young folks, young West Virginia fans need to hear this. And that's one of the reasons, of course, why we do it. But yeah, great insight from John. I love listening to him and his stories. And like I said, when you start hearing these names that he rattles off that he remembers, pretty fascinating and pretty amazing what he knows about West Virginia sports.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. Go ahead, Jackson.
I was going to say that, I knew a little bit about like the John Beilein and the Bob Huggins era of West Virginia basketball, but tonight I feel like Jerry West playing at West Virginia, but I'll be honest, I feel like I've learned quite a lot about the history of West Virginia basketball, and I got to say it is an amazing experience learning about it.
Yeah, and he didn't get to the the Catlin era, which is what I grew up in. That's some great basketball there as well, and I'm sure we'll have him back on talking about that era as well. But yeah, pretty phenomenal basketball teams then. So it's been historically great.
Yeah, and we want to do that next week because we had no idea. Greg and I had no idea that John was going to stop at essentially the end of the Sonny Moran era. But right. I think to Jackson's point, I think that. And John and I talked about this. This is a good time to look way back because of the circumstances this year with the team. People are, down about it and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is now we know much more about the way it was back then. But it's really important now to take it forward. Talk about the Gail Catlett era. We'll do that next week. Then the John Beilein era, and then the most recent era with Coach Huggins, because it fits to the March Madness when all eyes will be on basketball. So we're going to do that. But I really thought he might go beyond 75, but I'm glad he did, and there was a good reason why he didn't.
Yeah. Yep. Took a while to get through those. Well, listen, we are running way over time tonight, so we're going to have to wrap it up here, guys. Jackson, we appreciate you and your input and your insights on the football world. Daryl, as always, basketball man, and I always enjoy talking to you. Look forward to talking to you again next week. Frank, great job as always putting all this together. The graphics and the organization that you pull off every week is fantastic, and we appreciate you so much for doing that. Also, thanks to Mickey for sitting in with us through the football stages of this. We appreciate all you guys for tuning in and watching our show. We hope you'll continue to do so. We hope you'll go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. We appreciate that as well, as that always helps us. Appreciate it again, everyone, for tuning in, and we look forward to talking to you again next Wednesday night. Good night, everybody.